The sea was calm as the SS Meridian set sail from the bustling port of Anchorage. Captain Elias Gray stood at the helm, his weathered face etched with the experience of many voyages. Beside him, his first mate Lillian Hayes meticulously studied the charts. "We should reach the Pacific Rim by dawn," Lillian stated, tracing a route on the map. Elias nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. The crew bustled around the deck, preparing for what seemed to be an ordinary journey across the vast Pacific. Among them were the ship's engineer, Owen Carter, the medical officer, Nina Salazar, and a handful of seasoned sailors. However, a subtle unease lingered in the air, an unspoken premonition that something sinister awaited them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Elias addressed his crew. "Stay vigilant. The sea may be calm, but we must always be prepared for the unexpected." As night fell, a thick fog began to roll in, unlike any the crew had seen before. It was dense and unnaturally cold, shrouding the ship in an eerie silence. The fog clung to the SS Meridian, enveloping it in a suffocating embrace. Lillian, concerned, approached Elias. "Captain, this fog. It's not normal. We should reduce speed and keep a sharp lookout." Elias agreed, ordering the crew to be vigilant. The fog seemed to pulse with a life of its own, whispering secrets from the depths of the ocean. The ship's radar struggled to penetrate the murky veil, rendering navigation almost impossible. The crew moved about nervously, their usual banter subdued by the oppressive atmosphere. Owen checked the engines, ensuring everything was in working order, while Nina double-checked the medical supplies, her intuition telling her they might be needed. Midnight struck, and the ship's bell tolled ominously. As the fog thickened, strange sounds began to echo across the deck, whispers, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakably human. Owen, working in the engine room, felt a chill run down his spine as he heard a distant voice call his name. "Nina? Is that you?" he called out, but there was no response. The voice grew louder, more insistent, and Owen found himself drawn towards it, compelled by a force he couldn't explain. Meanwhile, on the deck, Nina was tending to a minor injury when she too heard her name. She looked up, expecting to see a crew member, but the deck was empty. The whispers grew more persistent, filling her with an inexplicable dread. Elias paced the bridge, uneasy. He knew the sea, but this fog was something else entirely. "Keep your eyes open and don't wander off alone," he warned his crew, though he knew their nerves were already frayed. By dawn, the fog had not lifted. It had become an impenetrable wall, isolating the SS Meridian from the rest of the world. The crew grew increasingly anxious, their nerves frayed by the continuous whispers that plagued their minds. Elias called a meeting in the captain's quarters. "We need to stay calm and focused. This fog, it's unnatural, but we can't let it drive us mad." Lillian nodded in agreement, though she could see the fear in her captain's eyes. "We need to find a way out of this fog. It's affecting the crew's morale and sanity." The whispers grew louder, now accompanied by fleeting shadows that danced just beyond the edge of visibility. The crew started reporting hallucinations, phantom figures, ghostly apparitions, and dark, twisted shapes lurking in the corners of their vision. Tensions ran high as the whispers morphed into disembodied voices, each crew member hearing something different. Owen heard the voice of his late wife pleading for help. Nina heard her mother's dying breaths, a memory she had buried deep. Elias tried to maintain order, but the fear was palpable. "Stay together," he urged. "This fog is playing tricks on us. It's feeding on our fears." Despite his efforts, the crew began to splinter. Paranoia set in, and trust eroded. Sailors accused one another of plotting against them, of being agents of the fog. Fights broke out, and Elias struggled to keep control. In the depths of the night, Lillian discovered an old, weathered journal in the ship's storage. It belonged to Captain Henry Blackwood, the last commander of a ship that had mysteriously disappeared in the same waters over a century ago. As Lillian read the journal, a chilling pattern emerged. Blackwood's ship had also encountered an inexplicable fog, and the crew had succumbed to madness and death. The journal's final entries spoke of an ancient curse, a vengeful spirit bound to the waters, seeking retribution for a long-forgotten wrong. "We're dealing with something far beyond our understanding," Lillian whispered to Elias. "This fog, it's a manifestation of that curse." Elias's face hardened. "Then we must find a way to break it. We can't let our fate be the same as Blackwood's crew." The next morning, the ship's cook, Marco, was found dead in the galley, his face twisted in a rictus of terror. The crew was horrified, and panic spread like wildfire. Elias ordered a lockdown, confining everyone to their quarters in a desperate attempt to prevent further deaths. But the fog was relentless. It seeped into the ship, a malevolent presence that could not be contained. The voices grew louder, more aggressive, taunting the crew, pushing them to the brink of insanity. Nina, trying to maintain her medical duties, found herself haunted by the ghostly apparitions of her past patients, their eyes accusing, their mouths silently screaming for vengeance. She clung to her professionalism, but the strain was beginning to show. The crew's numbers dwindled as the fog claimed more victims. Desperation set in, and Elias knew they had to find a way to lift the curse. Guided by Blackwood's journal, Lillian discovered a ritual that might appease the vengeful spirit. "We need to perform the ritual at the heart of the fog," Lillian explained. "It's our only chance." The remaining crew, now reduced to a handful of survivors, prepared for the dangerous journey. Armed with the journal and a few relics from the ship's hold, they ventured into the depths of the fog, guided by the faint whispers that had once tormented them. The atmosphere was tense as they navigated the dense fog. The once bustling ship now felt like a ghostly vessel, its corridors echoing with the sounds of their own footsteps. Every creak and groan of the ship like a prelude to something terrible. At the center of the fog, they encountered the spirit, a ghostly figure, shrouded in darkness, eyes burning with hatred. The air grew cold, and the whispers became a deafening roar. Elias, clutching Blackwood's journal, began the ritual, chanting the ancient words that promised to lift the curse. The spirit writhed and screamed, its form flickering between solidity and shadow. Lillian and Owen fought to protect Elias from the spirit's wrath, using the relics to ward off its attacks. Nina, drawing on her medical training, tended to the wounded, her hands shaking with fear, but her resolve unwavering. The spirit's screams grew louder, echoing through the fog like a banshee's wail. The crew's determination wavered, but Elias's voice remained steady as he continued the incantation. With a final, desperate effort, Elias completed the ritual. The spirit let out a final, agonizing scream before dissolving into the fog. The dense mist began to lift, revealing the clear blue sky and the vast expanse of the ocean. The survivors, exhausted and battered, returned to the SS Meridian. The ship, now free from the fog's grip, sailed towards the horizon, leaving the cursed waters behind. Elias, standing at the helm, looked back at the receding fog. "We've survived," he said softly, "but we'll never forget what we faced." Lillian nodded, the journal clutched tightly in her hands. "The sea holds many secrets, Captain. Let's hope we never have to face another one like this." As the SS Meridian sailed into the dawn, the crew knew they had been forever changed. The fog had tested their courage, their sanity, and their very souls. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but the memory of the deadly fog would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Years later, the tale of the SS Meridian and the deadly fog became a legend among sailors. Some dismissed it as a ghost story, while others swore it was true. But for those who had survived, it was a reminder of the mysteries that lurked beneath the surface of the sea, waiting for the unwary to stumble into their grasp. In the heart of the bustling metropolis of New York City, amidst the towering skyscrapers and the ceaseless hum of urban life, there existed a hidden world of darkness and depravity. Beneath the veneer of normalcy, a sinister figure lurked, preying on the unsuspecting and leaving a trail of terror in his wake. This was Dr. Henry Carter, a man of science and medicine, twisted into a monster by his own twisted desires. Dr. Carter was a renowned surgeon, celebrated for his skill and precision. His hands, once instruments of healing, had become tools of destruction. He reveled in the power he held over his patients, their lives hanging in the balance by his every decision. But beneath his facade of professionalism lurked a dark secret, a fascination with death that gnawed at his soul. As the years passed, Dr. Carter's fascination morphed into a morbid obsession. He began to experiment on his patients, manipulating their bodies and minds, pushing the boundaries of medical ethics. His experiments were not driven by a desire to cure or alleviate suffering. Instead, they were fueled by a twisted curiosity, a hunger to understand the delicate balance between life and death. Dr. Carter's patients became his unwilling subjects, their trust in him cruelly betrayed. He would administer experimental drugs, perform unauthorized procedures, and even orchestrate fatal accidents, all in the name of his macabre research. The hospital staff grew suspicious, their whispers following Dr. Carter like a shadow. But he was a master manipulator, always able to deflect their concerns, his reputation as a brilliant surgeon shielding him from scrutiny. One night, a new patient arrived at the hospital, a young woman named Emily Peterson. Emily was a vibrant soul, full of life and laughter, unaware of the darkness that awaited her. Dr. Carter saw her as an opportunity, a fresh canvas upon which he could paint his twisted masterpiece. He took a special interest in Emily's case, showering her with attention and promising a cure for her ailment. Emily, blinded by her trust in Dr. Carter, willingly submitted to his treatments. But as the days turned into weeks, she began to notice a change in her beloved doctor. His eyes, once filled with warmth, now held a chilling emptiness. His touch, once gentle, now sent shivers down her spine. Emily's fear grew with each passing day, but she was trapped, bound by her illness and the doctor's control over her treatment. One fateful night, Dr. Carter made his move. Emily awoke to find herself alone in her room, a strange concoction dripping into her IV. Her body felt heavy, her mind clouded. As she drifted into unconsciousness, she heard Dr. Carter's voice, a chilling whisper in her ear, promising her a new life, a life beyond pain and suffering. When Emily awoke, she found herself in a cold, sterile room, her body ravaged by Dr. Carter's experiments. She was no longer the vibrant young woman she once was, but a shell of her former self, her spirit broken, her body a grotesque testament to Dr. Carter's depravity. Emily's story is just one of many, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the hearts of even the most trusted individuals. Dr. Carter, the angel of death, continued his reign of terror, his victims growing in number, their identities lost to the shadows. The city remained oblivious, its citizens unaware of the monster lurking in their midst, waiting for his next opportunity to strike. As Emily lay in her hospital bed, her body a grotesque testament to Dr. Carter's depravity, she grappled with the horrific reality of her situation. Once a vibrant and full of life young woman, she was now a mere shadow of her former self, her spirit broken, her body ravaged by the doctor's twisted experiments. Fear gnawed at her, a relentless companion in her waking hours and a haunting presence in her dreams. She longed for escape, for a way to break free from Dr. Carter's clutches and reclaim her life. But she was trapped, confined to the sterile walls of the hospital, her weakened body unable to resist the doctor's control. Despite her despair, a flicker of hope remained within Emily's heart. She refused to succumb to the darkness that threatened to consume her. She would find a way to expose Dr. Carter's crimes, to bring his reign of terror to an end. But how could she do it? A mere shadow of her former self, surrounded by people who either feared or admired the doctor? One day, an opportunity presented itself. A new nurse, Sarah, joined the hospital staff. Her bright eyes and compassionate demeanor, a stark contrast to the cold indifference that pervaded the rest of the ward. Emily saw in Sarah a kindred spirit, someone who might be willing to listen to her story, to believe the truth about Dr. Carter. Gathering her courage, Emily approached Sarah, her voice trembling as she recounted the horrors she had endured. Sarah listened intently, her face etched with concern and disbelief. She had always admired Dr. Carter, seeing him as a brilliant and dedicated surgeon. But Emily's story shattered the illusion, revealing a monster lurking beneath the facade of a respected physician. Sarah knew she had to do something. She couldn't ignore Emily's pleas for help, couldn't turn a blind eye to the possibility of such a grave injustice. But she also knew that confronting Dr. Carter directly would be dangerous. He was a powerful figure, well-respected and feared within the hospital. Any accusation against him would likely be met with disbelief and dismissal. Sarah decided to gather evidence to document Emily's claims and build a case against Dr. Carter. She began to discreetly observe the doctor, noting his interactions with his patients, searching for any signs of wrongdoing. She also started to collect medical records, looking for inconsistencies or anomalies that might support Emily's story. As Sarah delved deeper into her investigation, she uncovered a trail of disturbing evidence. She found records of patients who had died under suspicious circumstances, their deaths attributed to natural causes, but raising troubling questions. She also witnessed Dr. Carter administering unauthorized medications to his patients, his actions shrouded in secrecy and devoid of any ethical considerations. The more Sarah learned, the more horrified she became. Dr. Carter wasn't just a negligent doctor, he was a monster, a predator preying on the vulnerable. She knew she had to act quickly before Dr. Carter could claim another victim. But how could she expose him? She was just a nurse, with no power or authority to challenge a respected surgeon. She needed help, someone who could wield the influence and credibility she lacked. Sarah's thoughts turned to Dr. Harris, the hospital's chief of staff. He was a man of integrity and a respected figure in the medical community. If she could convince him of Dr. Carter's crimes, he might be able to bring the doctor to justice. With a mix of determination and trepidation, Sarah approached Dr. Harris, laying out the evidence she had gathered and recounting Emily's harrowing story. Dr. Harris was initially skeptical, his mind struggling to reconcile the image of the brilliant surgeon he knew with the monster Sarah described. But the weight of the evidence and the sincerity of Sarah's conviction eventually swayed him. Together, Sarah and Dr. Harris began to build a case against Dr. Carter, meticulously piecing together the evidence and preparing for the inevitable confrontation. They knew it would be a difficult battle, but they were determined to bring the angel of death to justice. Dr. Carter, oblivious to the storm brewing around him, continued his macabre experiments, his thirst for knowledge and power insatiable. He reveled in the control he held over his patients, their lives hanging in the balance by his every decision. But his reign of terror was nearing its end, as the net of justice tightened around him. Sarah and Dr. Harris, armed with their evidence and unwavering determination, confronted Dr. Carter, presenting him with the irrefutable proof of his crimes. Dr. Carter, initially stunned into silence, quickly regained his composure, his face contorting into a mask of rage and disbelief. He denied all accusations, his voice laced with venom, painting Sarah as a delusional liar and Dr. Harris as a power-hungry opportunist. The confrontation was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Dr. Carter's charisma and reputation were formidable weapons, and Sarah and Dr. Harris knew that they had to tread carefully. They presented their evidence piece by piece, dismantling Dr. Carter's carefully constructed facade, revealing the monster beneath. The hospital staff, who had long harbored suspicions about Dr. Carter, watched in stunned silence as the truth unfolded before them. The image of the brilliant and compassionate surgeon they once admired crumbled, replaced by the chilling reality of a cold-blooded killer. Dr. Carter, cornered and desperate, made a final, desperate attempt to escape. He lunged at Sarah, his eyes filled with murderous intent. But Dr. Harris, anticipating his move, intervened, grabbing Dr. Carter and restraining him. The struggle was brief but intense, the tension in the room palpable. With Dr. Carter subdued, the authorities were called in. He was arrested, his reign of terror finally brought to an end. The hospital staff breathed a collective sigh of relief, the oppressive atmosphere that had hung over them for so long lifting. Emily, who had been watching the events unfold from her hospital bed, felt a surge of relief and gratitude. She had been through hell, but she had survived, and her story had finally been heard. She knew that the road to recovery would be long and arduous, but she was determined to reclaim her life, to heal both physically and emotionally. In the aftermath of Dr. Carter's arrest, the hospital underwent a thorough investigation, exposing the systemic flaws that had allowed his crimes to go undetected for so long. New protocols were implemented, ensuring that patients were protected from harm and that doctors were held accountable for their actions. The story of Dr. Henry Carter, the Angel of Death, served as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the hearts of even the most respected individuals. It was a cautionary tale, a testament to the importance of vigilance and the power of speaking up against injustice. As for Emily, she emerged from her ordeal a changed woman, her spirit tempered but not broken. She became an advocate for patient safety, using her voice to raise awareness and prevent others from suffering the same fate as she had. Her story was a beacon of hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unwavering pursuit of justice. John Harris was a long-haul trucker who had seen nearly every corner of the United States from behind the wheel of his 18-wheeler. His life was a series of endless highways, sleepless nights, and coffee-stained shirts. On this particular night, he was hauling a load of electronics from Chicago to Denver. The radio crackled with static as he switched through the stations, looking for something to keep him company during the long drive. The interstate was eerily quiet with only the occasional car passing by. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 2:34 a.m. John yawned and rubbed his eyes. He needed a break, but the delivery was on a tight schedule. Then he saw it, a rusted green road sign barely illuminated by his headlights. Oak Hollow, 5 miles. Oak Hollow? John muttered to himself. He didn't remember seeing it on the map. He shrugged, thinking a detour through a small town might offer a chance to stretch his legs and grab a cup of coffee. He turned off the interstate and onto the narrow, winding road that led to Oak Hollow. The road twisted and turned through dense forests, the trees creating a tunnel that seemed to close in on him. The asphalt was cracked and uneven, and his truck's suspension groaned in protest. As he drove deeper into the woods, the sense of unease grew. The headlights cast long, shifting shadows, and the only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional call of a night bird. John's grip tightened on the steering wheel when he saw a figure standing by the side of the road. It was a woman in a tattered dress, her hair matted and hanging over her face. She raised a hand as if to flag him down. Maybe she needs help, John thought. He slowed down and rolled down the window. You okay, ma'am? The woman didn't respond. She just stared at him with hollow, dark eyes. A shiver ran down John's spine. Something was wrong. He glanced around, but the road was empty except for his truck and the woman. Do you need a ride? He asked, though his instincts screamed for him to drive away. She stepped closer, her movements jerky and unnatural. John felt a chill in the air as she reached out a hand. Before he could react, she let out an ear-piercing scream that echoed through the trees. John slammed his foot on the gas, the truck lurching forward as he sped down the road, leaving the woman behind. John's heart pounded as he drove. The image of the woman burned into his mind. He glanced in the rearview mirror, but there was no sign of her. The road seemed to stretch on forever, and he began to wonder if he had made a mistake turning off the interstate. Just as he was about to consider turning back, he saw lights up ahead. He sighed in relief as he approached the small town. The sign at the town's entrance read, "Welcome to Oak Hollow," but something about the place felt off. The buildings were old and dilapidated, many with boarded-up windows and doors. The streetlights flickered, casting eerie shadows. John pulled up in front of a diner that looked like it hadn't been open in years. The neon sign flickered with the word "Diner," and he could see a faint light inside. He decided to take a chance and stepped out of the truck. The bell above the door jingled as he entered. The inside was as shabby as the exterior, with cracked vinyl seats and a layer of dust covering everything. A lone man stood behind the counter, wiping a glass with a dirty rag. "Can I help you?" the man asked, not looking up. John hesitated. "Yeah, just looking for some coffee and maybe directions. I'm on my way to Denver and took a wrong turn." The man finally looked up, his eyes dark and weary. "Coffee, huh? Haven't had anyone stop by for coffee in a long time." John took a seat at the counter as the man poured a cup of coffee. The air inside the diner was heavy and still, as if time had forgotten this place. John took a sip of the coffee and grimaced. It was bitter and cold, but he was too tired to care. "What's a trucker like you doing out here?" the man asked, his voice low and raspy. "Just needed a break from the interstate," John replied. "But this place seems different." The man let out a hollow laugh. "Different is one way to put it. Oak Hollow ain't on any map. People come here when they're lost, and they don't always leave." John felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" The man leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing. "This town has a way of keeping people. Strange things happen on that road you took. People see things that ain't there, hear things they shouldn't, and some folks just disappear." John's mind raced. The woman on the road, the eerie feeling, the abandoned town, it all seemed too surreal. "I saw a woman out there," he said. "She looked like she needed help, but something was off." The man's face darkened. "You saw her, huh? She's been out there for years, looking for someone to take her away, but no one ever does." John's skin prickled with goosebumps. "What happened to her?" "Nobody knows for sure," the man said. "Some say she was left here by a lover. Others think she was a victim of something worse, but she's not the only one. There are others, trapped by this place, bound to the road." John felt a sense of dread settling over him. How do I get out of here? The man pointed to a map on the wall. There's only one way. Keep driving west and don't stop. No matter what you see or hear, keep going. Oak Hollow doesn't let go easy. John finished his coffee and stood up. Thanks for the warning. The man nodded. Good luck. You'll need it. John left the diner, the man's words echoing in his mind. The town seemed even more foreboding in the dim light. He climbed back into his truck, started the engine, and headed west as instructed. The road ahead was dark and winding, but he was determined to leave Oak Hollow behind. As he drove, the sense of unease grew stronger. The trees loomed overhead, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to him. He turned on the radio, hoping for some music to break the silence, but all he got was static. He switched it off, the quiet becoming almost deafening. Then he saw them, figures emerging from the shadows along the roadside. Men, women, and children, their faces pale and eyes hollow, watching him as he passed. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stared with vacant expressions. John gripped the wheel tighter, refusing to slow down. Keep driving, he muttered to himself. Don't stop. The road seemed to stretch on forever, a never-ending nightmare. He glanced at the clock. 3:45 a.m. The minutes dragged by, each one feeling like an eternity. He kept his eyes on the road, but the figures grew closer, their faces pressing against the windows, whispering things he couldn't understand. John's hands were slick with sweat. He pressed down on the gas pedal, urging the truck to go faster. The figures kept pace, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. He could feel their breath on his neck, their hands clawing at the doors. "Get away from me," he shouted, his voice hoarse with fear. Just as John thought he couldn't take any more, he saw a light ahead. A small gas station, its neon sign flickering weakly. He swerved into the parking lot, his heart pounding. The figures vanished as he came to a stop, leaving him in a pool of dim light. He took a moment to catch his breath, then climbed out of the truck. The gas station was old and run down, but it was a beacon of hope in the oppressive darkness. He approached the door, which creaked open to reveal an elderly man behind the counter. "Need some gas?" the man asked, his voice surprisingly strong. "Yeah," John replied, trying to steady his voice, "and directions. How do I get out of here?" The man nodded as if he understood. "Fill her up, and I'll get you a map." John returned to the truck and began pumping gas. The night air was cool, and he felt a slight sense of relief. But that relief was short-lived. As he glanced around, he saw a figure standing at the edge of the light, a young man with a backpack, his thumb out as if hitchhiking. "Hey!" John called out. "You need a ride?" The hitchhiker stepped into the light, his eyes wide with fear. "Please, you have to help me. This place, it's not right." John hesitated, then nodded. "Get in. I'm heading west." The hitchhiker climbed into the passenger seat, and John finished pumping the gas. He paid the elderly man, who handed him a worn map. "Eyes up, just follow the main road," the man said. "And whatever you do, don't take any turns." John thanked him and got back into the truck. The hitchhiker was trembling, his eyes darting around nervously. "What's your name?" John asked, trying to keep the conversation light. "Tom," the young man replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tom Edwards." As they drove, Tom began to open up. He was a college student from New York, hitchhiking across the country on a break. He had stumbled upon Oak Hollow by accident, much like John, and quickly realized something was terribly wrong. "I saw people on the road," Tom said, his voice shaking. "They weren't real. I mean, they looked real, but something was off. They were like ghosts, trapped here." John nodded, his own experiences echoing Tom's words. "I saw them too, and a woman. She screamed at me." Tom's face went pale. "The woman in the dress? I've seen her. She tried to grab me. This place, it plays tricks on you, makes you see things." John glanced at Tom, then back at the road. "The man at the gas station said we need to keep driving west and not take any turns. Do you think we can trust him?" Tom hesitated, then nodded slowly. "It's the best advice we've got. I tried to leave before, but every road led me back here. We have to keep going." The road ahead was dark and winding, the trees closing in like a tunnel. John kept his eyes on the road, but the silence was oppressive. The figures began to appear again, lining the roadside, their hollow eyes following the truck's progress. John tightened his grip on the wheel. "Whatever happens, we don't stop. Got it?" Tom nodded, his face set in determination. "Got it." As they drove, the whispers started again, low and unintelligible at first, then growing louder. John tried to ignore them, but they seemed to seep into his mind, filling it with a cold dread. He glanced at Tom, who was staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched. The figures grew bolder, stepping onto the road, forcing John to swerve to avoid them. Each time he did, the truck seemed to slow, as if something was trying to drag it back. The whispers became shouts, the faces pressed against the windows, pleading and screaming. "Keep driving," Tom shouted, his voice breaking the spell. "Don't stop." John's hands were slick with sweat as he pressed down on the gas pedal, urging the truck to go faster. The figures fell behind, their screams fading into the distance, but the road seemed endless, a never-ending nightmare. After what felt like hours, the road began to change. The trees thinned and the oppressive darkness started to lift. John glanced at the clock, 4:55 a.m. Dawn was approaching, and with it a sense of hope. "Do you think we're getting out?" Tom asked, his voice filled with a cautious optimism. John nodded. "I think so. Just a little further." The road straightened and the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. But as they neared the edge of the forest, a figure appeared in the middle of the road. It was the woman in the dress, her arms outstretched, blocking their path. "Not again," John muttered, his heart pounding. Tom grabbed his arm. "Don't stop. Just go through her. She's not real." John swallowed hard and pressed the gas pedal to the floor. The truck barreled forward and the woman didn't move. Just as they were about to hit her, she vanished, leaving only a lingering scream. They burst out of the forest and onto a clear, open road. The sky was brightening, and the oppressive feeling lifted. John and Tom exchanged relieved glances. John kept driving until they reached a rest stop just outside of Denver. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over everything. He pulled into the parking lot and turned off the engine, both men sitting in stunned silence for a moment. "We made it," Tom said, his voice filled with wonder. John nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. "Yeah, we did." They climbed out of the truck, stretching and breathing in the morning air. It felt like they had escaped from a nightmare, stepping back into the real world. Tom turned to John. "Thank you. I don't think I could have made it out alone." John smiled. "We're both lucky to be out of there. Just remember, no more detours." Tom chuckled, the sound filled with genuine relief. No more detours. As they parted ways, John couldn't help but glance back at the road they had traveled. Oak Hollow was behind them, but the memory of the haunted town would stay with them forever. He climbed back into his truck, ready to complete his journey to Denver, thankful to leave the abandoned road behind. John knew he would never forget the eerie figures, the ghostly woman, and the sense of dread that had clung to him throughout the night. But he also knew he had survived, and that was all that mattered. With a deep breath, he started the engine and drove away, the sun rising on a new day. Imagine making a deal with a demon for unparalleled success, only to discover the horrifying price is your very soul. Join us as we delve into Amelia Carter's gripping journey from artistic despair to eerie fame and the dark forces she must confront to reclaim her life. Will she find redemption, or will the shadows consume her? Watch till the end to uncover the chilling twists of the Devil's Bargain. Amelia Carter was at the end of her rope. Once a promising artist, she now found herself struggling to make ends meet in a tiny, dilapidated apartment in the city. Her paintings, once praised for their vivid emotion and unique style, were now deemed unremarkable by the very critics who had once lauded her talent. Desperation gnawed at her as she realized she might have to give up on her dreams and find a mundane job to survive. One evening, after yet another gallery had turned her down, Amelia sat in her cluttered studio, tears of frustration streaking down her cheeks. Her phone buzzed with a notification, drawing her attention. It was a message from an old acquaintance, Lydia, who had recently achieved phenomenal success as an artist. "Amelia, I heard about your struggles. There's someone who might be able to help you, but it's unconventional. If you're interested, meet me at the Café Noir at midnight." Curiosity and desperation led Amelia to agree. At midnight, she found herself at the dimly lit Café Noir, a place that seemed to exist out of time, with its vintage decor and hushed ambiance. Lydia was waiting for her at a corner table, her eyes sparkling with an eerie confidence. "Thank you for coming. Lydia began, her voice low and conspiratorial. I know what it's like to struggle, to feel your talent slipping away, but I met someone who changed everything for me. Amelia leaned forward, intrigued despite her reservations. Who is this person? Lydia hesitated, then said, His name is Lucien. He's not ordinary. He can offer you a deal, success and recognition beyond your wildest dreams, but at a price. Amelia's heart pounded. What kind of price? You'll find out if you decide to meet him, Lydia replied, slipping a card across the table. It bore a simple address, 666 Shadow Lane. Amelia took the card, feeling a chill run down her spine. Was she really willing to go this far? But as she left the cafe and walked through the deserted streets, her resolve hardened. She had nothing to lose. The following night, Amelia found herself standing in front of an imposing Gothic mansion at the end of Shadow Lane. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the building's ornate facade. Gathering her courage, she knocked on the heavy, iron-bound door. To her surprise, it swung open almost immediately, revealing a tall man with striking features and piercing blue eyes. He smiled, a gesture that sent shivers down her spine. Amelia Carter, I presume? His voice was smooth and hypnotic. I am Lucien. Please come in. The interior of the mansion was lavishly decorated, a stark contrast to its ominous exterior. Lucien led her to a grand parlor where a fire crackled in an ornate fireplace. He gestured for her to sit, then poured them both a glass of dark red wine. I understand you're seeking success in your artistic endeavors, Lucien began, his eyes never leaving hers. I can offer you that. Fame, wealth, admiration, all within your grasp. But as Lydia mentioned, there is a price. Amelia's mouth was dry. What do you want in return? Lucien leaned back, his smile widening. Your soul, Amelia. In exchange for 10 years of unparalleled success, your soul will belong to me. A chill settled over her. It sounded absurd, like something out of a horror movie. Yet, the desperation in her heart made her consider it. And if I refuse? Lucien shrugged. Then you walk out of here, and your life continues as it has been, struggling, unfulfilled. The choice is yours. Amelia took a deep breath. Could she really make such a deal? Her mind raced with the possibilities, but one thought stood out. She couldn't continue living as she was. She needed this chance. All right, she said, her voice steady. I accept. Lucien's smile grew. He produced a parchment and a quill, pricking her finger to draw a drop of blood. Sign here, he instructed. With a trembling hand, Amelia signed her name. As the ink dried, Lucien's eyes seemed to glow with a sinister light. Congratulations, Amelia. Your journey to greatness begins now. True to Lucien's promise, Amelia's life transformed almost overnight. Her first painting after the pact, a hauntingly beautiful piece titled Eternal Night, sold for a staggering amount at an auction. Critics hailed it as a masterpiece, and galleries clamored to showcase her work. Invitations to exclusive art shows and high society events flooded in. With newfound confidence, Amelia embraced her success, creating more paintings that resonated deeply with viewers. Each piece seemed to carry an otherworldly quality, drawing people in with its raw emotion and intensity. She became the darling of the art world, her name synonymous with genius. Wealth followed fame, and Amelia moved into a luxurious loft in the heart of the city. She traveled the world, her art displayed in prestigious galleries, from New York to Paris. She was living the life she had always dreamed of, and yet a small part of her couldn't shake the unease that lingered in the background. At times, she caught herself staring at her reflection, wondering if she had made the right choice. But those moments were fleeting, overshadowed by the thrill of her achievements and the adoration of her fans. One evening at the opening of her latest exhibition, Amelia stood in the center of a bustling gallery, surrounded by admirers. As she basked in their praise, a familiar figure approached her. It was Lucien, looking as striking as ever. Enjoying your success? He asked, his eyes glinting with amusement. Amelia nodded, though a pang of fear twisted in her gut. Yes, I am. Thank you for everything. Lucien's smile was enigmatic. Remember, Amelia, this is only the beginning. Make the most of your 10 years. His words lingered in her mind long after he had disappeared into the crowd. 10 years seemed like a long time, but Amelia couldn't ignore the countdown that had begun the moment she signed that pact. As the years passed, Amelia's fame and fortune continued to grow. She became a household name, her art celebrated around the globe. However, with each passing year, the unease within her deepened. The shadow of the bargain she had struck loomed ever larger, casting a pall over her accomplishments. One night, while working late in her studio, Amelia heard a whisper. She turned, expecting to see someone, but the room was empty. Shrugging it off as fatigue, she returned to her painting. But the whispers persisted, growing louder and more insistent. Amelia? The voice was familiar yet distorted, sending chills down her spine. She tried to ignore it, but the whispers became more frequent, invading her thoughts even in the daylight. They spoke of darkness, of debt, of the price she had yet to pay. Determined to silence the voices, Amelia sought out Lucien. She found him in the same mansion where their deal had been struck. He greeted her with the same unsettling smile. Amelia, to what do I owe this visit? He asked, his tone mocking. The whispers, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. They won't stop. What are they? Lucien's eyes glittered with amusement. Ah, the reminders. They are merely a sign that your time is running out. You have 6 years left, if I recall correctly. Fear gripped her heart. Is there no way to end this? Lucien shrugged. A deal is a deal, Amelia. You knew the terms. She left the mansion with a heavy heart, the whispers haunting her every step. Despite her success, the price of her soul weighed heavily on her, a constant reminder of the darkness that awaited her. As Amelia's 6th year of success came to an end, the whispers grew more insistent, turning into voices that taunted and tormented her. They filled her mind with doubt and fear, making it increasingly difficult to focus on her work. She became paranoid, convinced that shadows were watching her every move. Her art began to take on a darker, more twisted quality. The vibrant colors and hopeful themes were replaced by somber tones and macabre imagery. Critics still praised her work, calling it a bold evolution of her style, but Amelia knew the truth. The darkness within her was seeping out, manifesting in her paintings. One night, unable to bear the torment any longer, Amelia sought refuge in alcohol. She drank heavily, hoping to drown out the voices and find some peace. As she stumbled through her apartment, she caught sight of her reflection in a mirror. Her eyes were hollow, her face gaunt. "Who are you?" she whispered, barely recognizing herself. In that moment, she realized the true cost of her deal. It wasn't just her soul that was at stake, but her very sanity. She had become a shadow of the person she once was, consumed by the darkness she had invited into her life. Desperate for a solution, Amelia reached out to Lydia, hoping her old friend might have some answers. They met at the Café Noir, where their journey had begun. "Lydia, I need your help," Amelia pleaded. "The voices? They're driving me insane. How did you cope?" Lydia's eyes were filled with sympathy. "I didn't. I couldn't. I made a similar deal, Amelia, and the whispers never stopped. They only grew louder. The only way I found peace was to accept my fate." Amelia's heart sank. There must be another way. We can't be the only ones who have dealt with this. Lydia shook her head. "I've searched for years. There is no escaping Lucien's grasp once you've made a deal with him. We are bound." As the realization of her fate settled in, Amelia felt a deep despair wash over her. She had traded her soul for success, and now it seemed there was no way out. Despite Lydia's words, Amelia refused to give up. She spent the next several months researching every possible way to break her pact with Lucien. She consulted occult books, sought out mystics, and even attended secret gatherings of those who dabbled in the dark arts. Each lead seemed promising at first, but ultimately led to dead ends. One night, after another fruitless search, Amelia returned to her apartment and found a package waiting for her. Inside was an old, leather-bound book with a note attached. "For those who seek redemption." She opened the book, discovering it contained ancient rituals and spells meant to break demonic contracts. The language was archaic and complex, but with determination, she began to decipher it. Weeks passed as she pored over the text, hoping to find a solution. One ritual stood out, a ceremony to summon the spirit of an ancient exorcist known for breaking infernal pacts. The ritual required rare ingredients and precise incantations, but it offered a glimmer of hope. Amelia gathered the necessary items and prepared for the ritual. On a moonless night, she drew a circle of protection in her studio, lighting candles and incense. As she began to chant the incantation, the air around her grew cold, and shadows seemed to gather at the edges of the circle. A figure materialized within the circle, an ethereal being with a calm, commanding presence. "I am Magnus, the exorcist. Why have you summoned me?" Amelia's voice trembled. "I made a deal with a demon named Lucien. He promised me success in exchange for my soul. Now I seek to break this pact. Magnus regarded her with a penetrating gaze. Breaking a demonic contract is no easy feat. It requires immense strength and the willingness to confront the darkness within yourself. Are you prepared for such a trial? Amelia nodded. I am. I'll do whatever it takes. Magnus explained the process, detailing the steps Amelia needed to take. The ritual required her to confront her deepest fears and the darkness she had allowed into her life. It would be a harrowing journey, but it was the only way to reclaim her soul. First, Magnus said, you must face the memories of your past, the moments that led you to make the deal with Lucien. Only by understanding your own desperation can you begin to undo the pact. Amelia spent days meditating on her past, reliving the moments of struggle and pain that had driven her to seek Lucien's help. She remembered the loneliness, the rejection, and the overwhelming desire to prove herself. Each memory was a dagger to her heart, but she endured, determined to find redemption. Next, Magnus guided her through a series of rituals meant to purify her soul. She fasted, prayed, and performed cleansing ceremonies, each step bringing her closer to confronting Lucien. Finally, the time came for the final confrontation. Magnus instructed her to summon Lucien within the circle of protection. The exorcist would stand by her side, but it was up to Amelia to break the contract. With trembling hands, Amelia lit the candles and began the summoning ritual. The air grew heavy with an oppressive presence as Lucien appeared, his eyes burning with fury. Amelia, he hissed, you dare summon me. I want to break our pact, Amelia declared, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart. I reclaim my soul. Lucien laughed, a sound that echoed through the room. You think you can break a contract forged in blood? You are mine, Amelia. Magnus stepped forward. The power of the contract lies in her consent. If she truly renounces it, you have no hold over her. Lucien's eyes narrowed. Very well, let her try. Amelia stood tall, gathering her courage. She looked Lucien in the eye, feeling the weight of her decision. I renounce our pact. I reject the success you gave me and the darkness it brought into my life. Lucien's form flickered, his anger palpable. You cannot simply undo what has been done. Your soul is bound to me. Magnus began to chant, his voice strong and resonant. The protective circle glowed with a brilliant light, pushing back the shadows. By the power of light and purity, I command you, demon, to release your hold on this soul. Lucien howled in rage, the light burning his form. You will pay for this, Amelia. You will know suffering beyond measure. Amelia's heart pounded, but she stood firm. I am not afraid of you. I take back my soul, my life, my freedom. The room filled with a blinding light as Magnus completed the exorcism. Lucien's form dissolved into the darkness, his screams echoing into the void. When the light faded, Amelia felt a profound sense of relief and exhaustion. The whispers were gone, and the shadows had lifted. Magnus placed a hand on her shoulder. You have done well, Amelia. Your soul is free. Tears of gratitude filled her eyes. Thank you, Magnus. I couldn't have done this without you. The exorcist nodded. Remember, the true strength lies within you. Use it wisely. With those words, he vanished, leaving Amelia alone in her studio. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace and clarity. In the days that followed, Amelia began to rebuild her life. She continued to paint, but now her work reflected a newfound sense of hope and resilience. The darkness that had once plagued her creations was replaced by light and beauty. She reached out to Lydia, sharing her experience and the path she had taken to break free from Lucien's grasp. Lydia, inspired by Amelia's strength, began her own journey toward redemption. Amelia's art continued to garner attention, but this time, it was for its genuine emotion and positive impact. She used her platform to speak out about the dangers of desperation and the importance of staying true to oneself. Her story resonated with many, inspiring others to seek their own paths to redemption. Despite the challenges she had faced, Amelia found that her true success lay not in fame or fortune, but in the strength of her spirit and the authenticity of her work. She had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, her soul intact. Years passed, and Amelia's legacy grew. She opened a gallery dedicated to helping struggling artists find their voice without compromising their integrity. The gallery became a beacon of hope and creativity, a place where artists could thrive and share their stories. Amelia often thought about Lucien and the pact she had made. She knew that darkness would always exist, but she had learned to navigate it with wisdom and courage. Her journey had taught her the value of resilience and the power of redemption. One evening, as she walked through her gallery, admiring the work of young artists, she felt a sense of fulfillment. Her life had come full circle, and she had found her true purpose. In the quiet moments, when the gallery was empty and the moonlight filtered through the windows, Amelia would sometimes hear a whisper, a reminder of the darkness she had overcome. But now, those whispers only served to remind her of her strength and the light she had brought into the world. She smiled, knowing that her journey was far from over. There were still stories to tell, battles to fight, and souls to save, and she was ready for whatever came next. Imagine a serene camping trip deep within the heart of Pine Ridge Forest. Four friends seeking adventure and a break from their everyday lives. But what starts as a peaceful escape quickly descends into a nightmare they could never have imagined. As they venture deeper into the forest, whispers from the shadows grow louder, guiding them to a place where reality bends and sanity is pushed to its breaking point. The ancient trees seem to watch, their twisted branches hiding secrets older than time itself. Lost and hunted, the friends must confront the malevolent force that lurks in the fog, a force that demands a sacrifice. Will they find a way out, or will the forest claim their souls forever? Join us on this chilling journey as we unravel the terrifying tale of the road to madness. Watch till the end if you dare. A group of friends, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of city life, decided to embark on a camping trip deep in the heart of the Pine Ridge Forest. There was Mark, the adventurous leader, always ready for a new challenge. Lisa, the skeptical realist who nonetheless enjoyed a good hike. Brian, the jokester who kept the group's spirits high. And Emma, the quiet observer with a deep appreciation for nature. They packed their gear, loaded it into Mark's SUV, and set off early in the morning. The drive was long, but filled with laughter and anticipation. The plan was simple: hike deep into the forest, set up camp, and enjoy a weekend away from civilization. Little did they know, their path would lead them to a place where reality and sanity would be tested. After several hours of driving, they arrived at the trailhead. The forest was dense, the trees towering above them like ancient sentinels. The group shouldered their backpacks and started their hike. The first few miles were uneventful, filled with the sounds of birds and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. As they ventured deeper, the forest grew darker and the air colder. A sense of unease began to settle in, but they brushed it off as the natural eeriness of an unfamiliar place. They continued their trek, unaware of the unseen eyes watching them from the shadows. Mark consulted the map frequently, ensuring they were on the right path. "Just a few more miles," he said, his voice breaking the uneasy silence that had fallen over the group. By late afternoon, they reached a small clearing and decided to set up camp. Tents were pitched, a fire was built, and the group settled down to enjoy the tranquility of the forest. As night fell, they gathered around the campfire, sharing stories and toasting marshmallows. It was during one of Brian's jokes that they first heard it, a distant, faint whispering that seemed to come from the depths of the forest. The laughter died down as they listened, straining to catch the words, but they were too faint to discern. "Probably just the wind," Lisa said, trying to sound nonchalant. But the uneasy looks exchanged around the fire told a different story. That night, sleep did not come easily. The whispering continued, growing louder and more insistent, as if the forest itself was trying to communicate with them. Morning brought little relief. The whispering had stopped, but a heavy fog had settled over the forest, giving the trees an otherworldly appearance. Breakfast was a quiet affair, each member of the group lost in their own thoughts. "We should stick together today," Mark suggested, sensing the growing tension. They agreed and set off to explore the area, hoping to shake off the unease that had settled over them. As they walked, the fog seemed to thicken, and the forest became a maze of indistinguishable paths. Mark checked the map again and again, but nothing seemed to match their surroundings. The realization slowly dawned on them: they were lost. Panic began to set in. They argued about the best course of action, but every path they chose seemed to lead them deeper into the forest's grasp. Hours turned into days. Food supplies dwindled, and the group's tempers flared. The whispering returned, more persistent and sinister, gnawing at their sanity. The forest seemed alive, its twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Brian's jokes had ceased, replaced by a haunted look in his eyes. Lisa's skepticism had turned to fear, and even Mark, usually so confident, was showing signs of doubt. Emma, usually the calmest, was plagued by nightmares and visions of shadowy figures. One night, as they huddled around a small fire, they heard footsteps circling their camp. Mark grabbed a flashlight and shone it into the darkness, but saw nothing. The footsteps stopped, but the whispering grew louder, echoing in their minds. The days blended into each other, each one more disorienting than the last. The group began to fray at the edges, paranoia taking root. Brian accused Mark of leading them astray, while Lisa snapped at every small inconvenience. Mark tried to keep everyone together, but he too was struggling. The whispering was relentless, filling his mind with dark thoughts. He started seeing things that couldn't be real. Phantom shapes moving through the trees, eyes glowing in the dark. One morning, they awoke to find Emma missing. Panic set in as they searched the area, calling her name, but there was no sign of her. The whispering seemed to mock them, growing louder and more chaotic. It was during one of these frantic searches that Mark stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin hidden deep within the forest. The cabin was dilapidated, covered in moss and vines as if it had been forgotten by time. Desperation drove them inside, hoping to find clues to Emma's whereabouts. What they found instead were old, yellowed pages scattered across the floor. They were journal entries, written by someone who had camped in the forest many years ago. The journal spoke of the forest's curse, of how it ensnared those who entered, driving them to madness. It described the whispering voices, the shadowy figures, and the fog that never lifted. It ended with a final, chilling entry. The forest has claimed me. There is no escape. The revelation shattered what little hope they had left. Mark tried to rally the group, but the weight of the journal's words hung heavy over them. They argued about what to do next, but deep down they knew the forest had already won. Lisa, now visibly shaken, insisted they keep moving, but Brian refused. He sat by the fire, staring blankly into the flames. "It's useless," he muttered. "We're never getting out of here." That night, the whispering reached a crescendo. The voices seemed to come from all directions, surrounding them, filling their minds with dark thoughts. Mark could feel his grip on reality slipping, and he knew the others felt the same. In the early hours of the morning, they were jolted awake by a blood-curdling scream. It was Emma, her voice filled with terror. They ran towards the sound, stumbling through the fog, but found nothing but silence when they reached the source. Desperation turned to despair. Mark, Lisa, and Brian huddled together, their fear palpable. They knew they couldn't stay in one place, but every direction seemed equally hopeless. Mark made a decision. "We have to confront whatever's out there," he said. "We can't keep running." They gathered what little courage they had left and set off into the forest, following the whispering voices. The fog closed in around them, the trees twisted and gnarled, the air grew colder, and the sense of dread intensified. As they ventured deeper, the forest seemed to come alive. Shadows danced around them, and the whispering grew louder, more insistent. They stumbled upon a clearing, at the center of which stood a massive, ancient tree. Its bark was blackened, and its twisted branches reached out like claws. The whispering reached a fever pitch, and the shadows coalesced into a figure, a spectral, ethereal being that seemed to be part of the forest itself. The figure spoke, its voice a chorus of whispers. "You have trespassed on sacred ground." Mark stepped forward, his heart pounding. "We didn't mean to. We're lost." The figure's eyes glowed with an eerie light. "The forest demands a sacrifice." Before they could react, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The tree's roots burst from the earth, wrapping around Mark, Lisa, and Brian, pulling them towards the ancient tree. In their final moments, as the forest closed in around them, they understood the true horror of Pine Ridge Forest. It was not just a place, but a living entity, feeding on the fear and madness of those who dared to enter. The forest had claimed its victims, and the whispering voices fell silent, leaving nothing but the eerie, unbroken stillness of the cursed woods. Years later, the story of the missing campers became a local legend, a cautionary tale told around campfires to dissuade others from venturing too deep into Pine Ridge Forest. But for those who listened closely, the whispering voices could still be heard echoing through the trees, a reminder of the forest's insatiable hunger for lost souls. Samantha felt a chill as she walked through the gates of Oakwood High School. The building was ancient, with ivy-covered walls and windows that seemed to hide secrets. Her family had just moved to this small town, and she was starting her junior year at a new school. She hoped to make a fresh start, but something about this place felt wrong from the very beginning. As she made her way to the main entrance, she noticed a group of students whispering and glancing nervously at her. Ignoring them, she pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped inside. The hallway was dimly lit, with old, flickering fluorescent lights casting eerie shadows on the cracked linoleum floor. Her first class was English literature. The room was musty, filled with old books and dust-covered desks. She took a seat near the window, trying to blend in. The teacher, Mrs. Hartman, was a stern-looking woman with piercing eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Welcome, class," Mrs. Hartman began, her voice as cold as the room. "Today we will discuss Gothic literature and its impact on modern storytelling." Samantha's mind wandered as the teacher droned on. She glanced out the window and saw a small cemetery at the edge of the school grounds. The gravestones were old and worn, and she could swear she saw a figure standing among them, watching her. During lunch, Samantha decided to explore the school grounds. She wandered towards the cemetery, drawn by an inexplicable urge. The closer she got, the colder the air became. She wrapped her jacket tighter around herself, but it did little to ward off the chill. As she approached the cemetery gates, she saw the figure again, a tall, shadowy silhouette that seemed to be waiting for her. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she couldn't turn away. She stepped through the gates and felt an overwhelming sense of dread. "Who are you?" she called out, her voice trembling. The figure remained silent, but she could feel its eyes on her, piercing through the fog that had begun to settle around the gravestones. She took a step closer, and the figure vanished, leaving behind a trail of icy mist. Confused and unnerved, Samantha turned to leave but stumbled over a gravestone. She caught herself and looked down, reading the inscription. Eleanor W., 1890 to 1908. She shivered, realizing that the girl buried here had been her age when she died. That night, Samantha couldn't shake the eerie feeling from the cemetery. As she drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with shadowy figures and whispers she couldn't understand. She found herself standing in the cemetery again, but this time it was different. The air was thick with fog, and the gravestones seemed to glow with an unnatural light. She saw the shadowy figure once more, standing at the far end of the cemetery. This time it began to move towards her. Panic surged through her, but her feet felt like they were glued to the ground. The figure reached out a hand, and she felt an icy grip around her wrist. With a start, Samantha woke up, drenched in sweat. She glanced at her clock. It was 3:33 a.m. She tried to calm her racing heart, telling herself it was just a dream. But the icy grip on her wrist still lingered, a phantom sensation that wouldn't fade. The next day at school, Samantha couldn't focus. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the dream and the figure in the cemetery. During her free period, she decided to visit the library. Maybe she could find some information about the cemetery or the figure she had seen. The library was just as old and eerie as the rest of the school. Dusty shelves lined the walls, filled with books that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. She approached the librarian, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes. "Excuse me," Samantha began. "Do you have any old yearbooks or records about the school?" The librarian nodded and led her to a back room filled with archives. "Feel free to look through these," she said. "There's a lot of history in this school." Samantha thanked her and began to sift through the old yearbooks. She found one from 1908 and flipped through its yellowed pages. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw a familiar face, the shadowy figure from her dreams. The caption read, "Eleanor W., 1890, 1908. Intrigued and terrified, Samantha continued to read about Eleanor. According to the yearbook, Eleanor had been a student at Oakwood High School who mysteriously disappeared in 1908. Rumors had spread that she was involved in dark rituals and that her spirit still haunted the school grounds. Samantha found an old newspaper article tucked inside the yearbook. It detailed the search for Eleanor and the subsequent discovery of her body in the school cemetery. The article hinted at foul play, but concluded that the cause of death was never determined. Determined to find out more, Samantha approached Mrs. Hartman after class. Mrs. Hartman, do you know anything about a student named Eleanor who went missing in 1908? Mrs. Hartman's face paled. Eleanor W., she said slowly, was a tragic case. Was a tragic case. It's best not to dwell on the past, Samantha. Some things are better left forgotten. But Samantha couldn't forget. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had really happened to Eleanor. The clock ticked past midnight, and as she finally began to drift off to sleep, the nightmares returned. In her dream, Samantha found herself back at school, but it was different, darker, more sinister. The hallways were empty, and the sound of her footsteps echoed eerily. She walked towards her English classroom, feeling an invisible force pulling her. When she entered the classroom, she saw Eleanor sitting at one of the desks, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. "Help me," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. Samantha felt a chill run down her spine. "How can I help you?" she asked. Before Eleanor could answer, the scene changed. The classroom walls began to bleed, and shadows danced across the ceiling. Samantha felt herself being pulled into the darkness, the air thick with the smell of decay. She woke up screaming, her heart pounding. Her mother rushed into the room, concern etched on her face. "Samantha, are you okay?" Samantha nodded, trying to catch her breath. It was just a nightmare, she lied, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. The next day, Samantha couldn't concentrate on her classes. She felt an overwhelming need to uncover the truth about Eleanor. After school, she snuck into the basement, a place students were forbidden to go. The air was damp and musty, and the dim light barely illuminated the narrow, cobweb-covered hallway. She found a locked door at the end of the hall. Using a hairpin, she managed to pick the lock and push the door open. Inside was a small room filled with old, forgotten school supplies and furniture covered in dust. In the corner, she spotted a large, ornate mirror that seemed out of place. As she approached the mirror, she noticed an inscription on the frame, "Eleanor W. May you rest in peace." Samantha's reflection flickered, and for a moment she saw Eleanor standing behind her. She spun around, but the room was empty. Determined to understand the connection, Samantha touched the mirror's surface. It was cold to the touch, and as she pressed her hand against it, she felt herself being pulled into another world. Samantha found herself standing in a version of the school that was even more decrepit and decayed. The walls were cracked and covered in mold, and the air was filled with the stench of rot. She realized she had crossed over into some sort of parallel dimension. Eleanor was there, waiting for her. "You've crossed over," Eleanor said. "You're the first one who has been able to do it." Samantha felt a mix of fear and determination. "Why am I here? What do you need from me?" Eleanor's eyes were filled with sadness. "I was betrayed by someone I trusted. They performed a dark ritual that trapped my spirit here. I need you to find the book they used and destroy it." Samantha nodded, feeling a sense of purpose. "Where is the book?" Eleanor pointed to the library for "It's hidden in the library in a secret compartment behind the portrait of the school's founder." Returning to the real world, Samantha rushed to the library. She found the portrait of the school's founder, a stern-looking man with cold eyes. She pushed the painting aside and discovered a hidden compartment. Inside was a dusty, leather-bound book filled with strange symbols and incantations. As she pulled the book out, she heard a voice behind her. "What are you doing, Samantha?" She turned to see Mrs. Hartman standing there, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You shouldn't have come here," Mrs. Hartman hissed. "That book holds power you can't understand." Realizing that Mrs. Hartman was somehow involved in Eleanor's death, Samantha clutched the book tightly. "I have to destroy this," she said, her voice trembling but determined. Mrs. Hartman's expression turned menacing. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. That book is the key to keeping Eleanor's spirit trapped. If you destroy it, you'll unleash a power you can't control." Samantha's heart raced as she weighed her options. She knew she couldn't trust Mrs. Hartman, but the thought of releasing something even more dangerous was terrifying. Taking a deep breath, she turned and ran, clutching the book to her chest. Samantha fled to the cemetery, the one place she felt Eleanor's presence most strongly. As she reached the gates, she heard Mrs. Gordon Hartman's angry shouts echoing behind her. She had to act quickly. Kneeling by Eleanor's gravestone, she opened the book to the last page. There, she found a spell to break the curse and set Eleanor's spirit free. She began to read the incantation aloud, her voice shaking with fear and determination. The wind picked up, swirling around her as she spoke. Shadows seemed to rise from the ground, writhing and twisting in the air. She felt an immense pressure, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. Mrs. Hartman appeared at the edge of the cemetery, her face twisted in fury. "Stop!" she screamed. "You don't know what you're doing." Ignoring her, Samantha continued to read the spell. The book began to glow with a brilliant light, and she felt a surge of energy course through her. As she finished the incantation, the book disintegrated in her hands, turning to ash. A deafening silence followed. The shadows dissipated, and the air grew still. Eleanor's spirit appeared before Samantha, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "You've set me free." With that, Eleanor's spirit faded, leaving behind a sense of peace that Samantha had never felt before. She turned to face Mrs. Hartman, who was now standing silently, her eyes filled with a strange mix of anger and resignation. "You don't understand what you've done," Mrs. Hartman said softly. "There are forces at work here that you cannot comprehend." Samantha stood her ground. "I did what was right. Eleanor deserved to be free." Mrs. Hartman sighed, a look of defeat crossing her face. "Perhaps, but remember this, Samantha. Some secrets are better left buried." As the sun began to rise, casting its first light over the cemetery, Samantha felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had uncovered the truth and broken the curse. While the future was uncertain, she knew she had done the right thing. Oakwood High School would never be the same, but neither would she. Samantha walked away from the cemetery, ready to face whatever came next, with the courage she had discovered within herself. The eternal nightmare had ended, and with it, a new chapter of her life began. The rain poured down heavily as Jonathan stepped onto the platform of the deserted train station. It was an eerie night, with fog rolling in from the nearby forest, making visibility poor. Jonathan clutched his ticket tightly, its edges damp from the rain. The ticket was for the midnight train, a service that had only recently been reinstated after years of being out of operation. As the clock struck midnight, the train rolled into the station with a ghostly wail. The train's old-fashioned carriages and dim lighting gave it an otherworldly feel. Jonathan boarded quickly, shaking off the rain and taking a seat by the window. He was the only passenger in his carriage. As the train began to move, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He turned to look down the aisle, but saw no one. The sense of unease grew stronger, and he wondered what had compelled him to take this journey in the first place. As the train rattled along the tracks, Jonathan tried to settle in for the journey ahead. He was heading to the small town of Ravenswood, where he had recently inherited a house from a distant relative. The prospect of exploring his new property had excited him, but now, in the dim light of the train, he felt a growing sense of dread. Jonathan's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, chilling realization. He was no longer alone in the carriage. A figure had silently taken a seat at the far end. The passenger was dressed in old-fashioned clothing, and their face was obscured by the shadows. "Hello?" Jonathan called out, his voice wavering slightly. There was no response. The figure remained motionless, staring out the window. Trying to shake off his unease, Jonathan decided to explore the train. He stood up and walked towards the next carriage, hoping to find a conductor or another passenger to speak with. But as he passed through the connecting doors, he found the next carriage empty as well. Jonathan continued his search through the train, moving from one empty carriage to the next. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the tracks. Finally, he reached the front of the train and found the conductor's compartment. The conductor, an elderly man with a weathered face, looked up as Jonathan approached. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked in a gruff voice. "Yes," Jonathan replied. "I was wondering if there are any other passengers on this train. It's eerily quiet." The conductor's expression darkened. "This is the midnight train," he said slowly. "It doesn't run for ordinary passengers. Those who board have their own reasons, and not all of them are alive." Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" he asked. The conductor sighed. "There are stories about this train, sir. Some say it travels between worlds, carrying souls who have unfinished business. Be careful and trust no one." Jonathan returned to his seat, the conductor's words echoing in his mind. He glanced towards the silent passenger at the end of the carriage, who hadn't moved an inch since Jonathan first saw them. Trying to distract himself, he rummaged through his bag and pulled out an old journal he had found in the inherited house. The journal belonged to his great uncle, the previous owner of the house. Jonathan had been eager to read it, hoping it might contain clues about his new property. He opened the journal and began to read by the dim light of the overhead lamp. The entries were dated from decades ago, detailing his great uncle's research into local legends and supernatural occurrences. Jonathan's eyes widened as he read about the night train, a spectral train that appeared only at midnight, carrying lost souls and travelers between realms. The entries became increasingly frantic, describing strange occurrences in the house and visions of ghostly figures. The final entry was particularly chilling. I must ride the night train to find the truth. If I do not return, let this journal be a warning. The train continued its journey through the night, the fog outside growing thicker. Jonathan felt a sense of urgency after reading his great-uncle's journal. He needed to uncover the truth about the night train and its passengers. He decided to approach the silent figure at the end of the carriage. As he walked closer, he noticed that the figure's clothes were worn and tattered, and their skin had a pallid, almost translucent quality. "Excuse me," Jonathan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Do you know anything about this train?" The figure slowly turned to face him, revealing hollow, empty eyes. Jonathan took a step back in shock. Before he could say anything more, the figure began to fade, becoming increasingly transparent until it vanished completely. Jonathan's heart raced. The passenger had been a ghost. He hurried back to his seat, his mind racing with questions. Was his great-uncle still on this train? Were there other spirits seeking answers or closure? Determined to find more answers, Jonathan made his way back to the conductor's compartment. He needed to know more about the train's mysterious nature and its purpose. When he arrived, the conductor was waiting for him, a knowing look in his eyes. "I see you've encountered one of our special passengers," the conductor said. "Yes," Jonathan replied. "Who was that? And what is this train really?" The conductor leaned back in his seat, his gaze distant. "The night train is a vessel between worlds," he explained. "It travels through the realms of the living and the dead, carrying those who have unresolved matters. Some seek answers, others seek redemption." Jonathan's thoughts turned to his great-uncle. "My great-uncle wrote about this train. He believed it held the key to something important. Do you know if he's on board?" The conductor shook his head. "I cannot say. Each journey is different, and the passengers vary. You must follow your instincts and seek the truth yourself." Jonathan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He decided to search the train more thoroughly, hoping to find any clues that might lead him to his great-uncle or reveal more about the night train. As he moved through the carriages, he noticed an unusual pattern in the wood paneling of one of the walls. Upon closer inspection, he discovered a hidden latch. With some effort, he managed to open a concealed door, revealing a narrow, while dimly lit passage. Jonathan stepped inside, the door closing behind him with a soft click. The passage was lined with old photographs and newspaper clippings, detailing the history of the night train and its passengers. He saw images of ghostly figures and stories of mysterious disappearances. At the end of the passage, he found a small compartment containing a collection of personal items, letters, trinkets, and mementos left behind by his passengers. Among them was a photograph of his great-uncle, standing beside the very train Jonathan was on. Jonathan felt a chill as he examined the photograph. His great-uncle looked much younger, but there was no mistaking his determined expression. It was clear that he had boarded the night train seeking answers, just as Jonathan had. As he continued to explore the hidden compartment, Jonathan found a letter addressed to him. The handwriting was unmistakably his great-uncle's. With trembling hands, he opened the letter and began to read. "Dear Jonathan, if you are reading this, it means you have embarked on the same journey I once took. The night train holds many secrets, and its passengers are bound by their unfinished business. I sought to uncover the truth behind our family's curse, and I believe the answers lie within the train's spectral corridors. Be cautious, for not all spirits are friendly. Some are trapped by their own fears and regrets. Trust your instincts, and remember that the past and present are intertwined on this train. Yours in spirit, Elias." Jonathan's resolve strengthened. He had to uncover the truth, not just for his great uncle, but for himself and their family. With the letter in hand, Jonathan retraced his steps, determined to confront whatever forces were at play on the night train. He returned to his carriage where the once empty seat now held another figure, a woman with a sorrowful expression. "Who are you?" Jonathan asked, his voice firm. The woman looked up, her eyes filled with sadness. "I am one of many souls seeking redemption," she said softly. "I made mistakes in my life, and now I am bound to this train until I find peace." Jonathan felt a pang of empathy. "Do you know anything about my great uncle, Elias?" The woman nodded. "Elias was a kind soul. He helped many of us understand our past, but he too was searching for answers. He believed the key to ending the curse lay in the heart of the train." Suddenly, the train shuddered and the lights flickered. A sense of foreboding filled the air. The woman glanced around, fear evident on her face. "The conductor," she whispered. "He is not what he seems." Jonathan's mind raced. The conductor had been helpful, but could he be hiding something? He hurried towards the front of the train, the woman's warning echoing in his ears. As he approached the conductor's compartment, the door creaked open on its own. Inside, the conductor stood waiting, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Ah, Jonathan," the conductor said, his voice echoing ominously. "You've discovered more than most passengers ever do." Jonathan took a step back, his heart pounding. "What are you? What is this train really?" The conductor's form began to shift, his features becoming more grotesque and otherworldly. "I am the guardian of this realm," he hissed. "The night train is a bridge between the living and the dead, and I ensure that those who board have unfinished business." Jonathan clenched his fists. "And my great uncle? What happened to him?" The conductor's expression darkened. Elias was close to discovering the truth, but he fell victim to his own fears. He is still here, trapped in a cycle of torment. Summoning his courage, Jonathan faced the conductor. "Then I will free him and the others. This cycle must end." The conductor laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. "You think you can defy the nature of this train? Very well, Jonathan. Let us see if you have the strength to do so." The train's lights flickered violently as Jonathan faced the monstrous conductor. Shadows danced along the walls and the air grew colder. Jonathan felt a surge of determination. He had to end this nightmare and free the souls trapped on the night train, including his great uncle. Summoning all his courage, Jonathan lunged at the conductor. The creature's form wavered and shifted, but Jonathan didn't relent. He grabbed the conductor's arm, feeling a surge of energy pass through him. For a moment, he saw flashes of memories. Lost souls, unfinished stories, and Elias's face, filled with desperation. "You cannot defeat me," the conductor growled, his voice distorted and echoing. "I am bound to this train, as are you now." But Jonathan refused to give in. "I will break this cycle," he said through gritted teeth, "for my family and for all the souls you've trapped." With a final burst of strength, Jonathan pushed the conductor back, breaking his hold. The train shuddered violently, and the walls seemed to warp and twist. The conductor let out a furious scream as his form dissolved into shadow, dissipating into the air. The train began to slow, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Jonathan looked around, breathing heavily. The ghostly figures that had haunted the carriages now appeared more solid, their expressions relieved. Jonathan returned to the compartment where the woman had sat. She smiled at him, her form becoming clearer. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have freed us." Jonathan nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. He knew he had done what his great uncle had set out to do. As the train came to a stop, the fog outside began to clear, revealing a serene landscape bathed in the light of dawn. He stepped off the train, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. The spirits of the passengers slowly faded into the light, their unfinished business finally resolved. Jonathan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his journey lift from his shoulders. He had faced the night train and uncovered its secrets, freeing the souls trapped within. With a final glance at the train, now silent and still, he turned and walked towards his new life in Ravenswood, ready to embrace whatever the future held. Jonathan's life in Ravenswood flourished. The old house became a place of solace and history, and the townspeople often visited to hear the story of the night train and the courageous young man who broke its curse. Jonathan made sure to honor the memory of his great-uncle Elias and the spirits who had finally found peace. Every now and then, Jonathan would walk to the old oak tree in his backyard, a symbol of his family's past and the strength it took to face it. He knew that while the night train's journey had ended, his own journey was just beginning. And so, the tale of the night train became a legend of redemption and bravery, a story passed down through generations, reminding everyone that even in the darkest of nights, there is always the promise of dawn.